The banners flapped harshly in the wind, damp with rain and soaked in blood. Robb Stark stood in the center of the war camp outside River Run, the weight of command settling heavier than his armor ever had. They had won a great victory at the Whispering Wood. They had captured Jaime Lannister, the king's lair himself, bound and bloodied. The men had cheered. Lords and bannermen patted Robb's shoulder and hailed him as king in the north. But in the silence of his tent, when the echoes of battle faded and the air stank only of mud and death, Robb wasn't sure what victory really meant. Eddard Stark arrived in the camp that night, broken but alive. He had escaped King's Landing with the help of some remaining loyalists when chaos erupted after King Robert's death. Ned hadn't been imprisoned yet. In this world he made it out, dragging old wounds and hard truths. He embraced his son beneath the black sky and knew immediately what had to be done. "This war cannot be won with mercy," he said, voice low, filled with sorrow. "Your grandfather showed mercy once, and the Mad King burned him alive for it." Robb didn't speak for a long time. He looked at Jaime Lannister, tied to a post, glaring at them like a cornered animal but laughing through his split lip. "You're afraid of what my father will do?" Jaime spat. "Kill me, and Tywin will burn the Riverlands to the ground. Keep me alive, and maybe you'll live long enough to regret that face." But Ned only stared. "Your father already lit the Riverlands aflame. Your sister holds my daughters captive. You pushed a boy from a tower and started this war with your arrogance." Jaime shrugged, his cocky mask slipping for just a breath. "And yet you hesitate." The next morning the camp gathered before the weirwood tree Robb had planted for. Strength for the old gods. Arya's sword, needle, hung from Robb's hip as a token of the sister he couldn't save. Sansa's handkerchief, stained with a drop of blood from King's Landing, was tied around his wrist. When the king's lair was brought forward, bound and beaten, a hush swept over the soldiers. He stood tall despite his wounds. Robb looked to his. "Father, one last time. Is this justice, Father?" Ned didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It's war. War has no clean justice. But you swore to protect the North. This man brings us nothing but fire and death." Jaime knelt. "Do it then, boy. Let the North sing songs about how brave you were to kill a prisoner." And with that, Robb Stark took the sword and struck. Off young Lannister's head, before the camp dot it rolled into the mud. Golden hair streaked red. Silence. Then murmurs. Then roaring approval. The North had executed the lion, but deep in his heart, Ned Stark knew they had just shattered the last bridge to peace. The news traveled faster than Raven's dot by the time the headless body of Jaime Lannister was burned in. A shallow ditch outside River Run. A dozen messengers had already scattered across Westeros. Some carried word of the North's bold justice. Others carried it as a threat. But one rider, pale with fear and red-eyed from riding hard, galloped into King's Landing by nightfall, hands shaking, as he knelt before Cersei Lannister. She didn't speak at first. She didn't weep. She simply stared into the fire, unmoving as the messenger laid Jaime's golden lion pendant on the table, crusted with dried blood. "He knelt," the messenger said, his voice breaking. "He didn't beg. He told them to do it." Cersei's fingers curled around her wine goblet, then crushed it in her hand. Blood and red wine dripped between her fingers, but she didn't flinch. "Leave?" she said coldly. The room emptied in seconds. When the door closed, she collapsed into the chair, her body trembling, not from sorrow but from rage. "They killed him like a dog," she whispered. "They took him from me." Then she screamed. That night, half the court heard the Queen Regent's howl, and by morning, the Red Keep felt like a tomb. Even Joffrey, with all his cruelty and cocky bravado, dared not taunt her. He understood enough to stay away, but to win. Tywin heard the news in Harrenhal, and he did not scream. He sat at the war table, stone-faced as a scout relayed every detail, the crowd, the execution, even the words Ned Stark had said. When the scout was finished, Tywin rose silently, walked to the hearth, and cast a single gold coin into the flames. "Send word to Sir Amory Lork," he said. "The Riverlands are to be scoured. Burn every village. Kill every man who carries a wolf on his banner. Hang every boy who bears the name Stark." "My lord," the scout stammered, the king. Tywin's voice cracked like a whip. "My son is dead. My heir. And you dare mention that sniveling boy in King's Landing?" He dismissed the entire council. Alone in the war room, Tywin sat with Jaime's sword in his lap. It had been returned by the Starks, another insult. They'd cleaned the blade. He would not. Far away, in King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He read the letter 3 times in his solar, heart sinking further with each pass. The sigil was clear, a Stark direwolf inked in black, stamped in blood-red wax. The words inside were cold, without flourish. "Justice is done. Jaime Lannister is dead. Tell the Queen my sisters are still alive, but not for long if more northern. Blood is spilled." Tyrion knew what this meant. He closed the letter slowly and turned to Varys, who stood quietly by the door. "This changes everything," Tyrion said. Varys raised a single brow. "It was always changing. You just refused to believe it." At Winterfell, Catelyn Stark wept when she heard. She wept for the daughter she could no longer trade for. She wept for the fire that would rain down from Casterly Rock. But most of all, she wept because she could no longer tell Robb what she should have screamed before. "Don't kill him. He was our only hope," she whispered, alone in her chambers, rocking back and forth. My girls. But outside, the banners flew higher than ever before. Men shouted Robb's name. They called him king. They called him avenger. They called him the man who killed the Kingslayer. And the North, for a moment, believed itself strong. They didn't know Tywin. Lannister was already on the march, and he wasn't coming for negotiation. The Riverlands had seen war before, but never like this. By the time the banners of House Lannister appeared on the horizon, the people of the Riverlands had already begun to flee. Old men whispered tales of dragons and fire, but Tywin Lannister's revenge was colder, crueler, and far more calculated than any Targaryen madness. He didn't come with wildfire. He came with order, the kind of order that erased towns from maps. At Fairmarket, the bells rang for surrender before the first torch was thrown. The village elder stepped out with his grandchild in his arms, holding a white cloth. "We're not soldiers," he said. "We're fisherfolk. We've got no quarrel." Sir Amory Lork didn't even slow his horse. He ran the old man through without a word, then turned to his men. No survivors. They raised the wolf. Screams filled the streets within moments. Children were dragged from cellars. Women were pulled from behind haystacks. Men were strung up on meat hooks and left to die over their own hearths. By morning, the town no longer existed. The Lannister banners rose above charred ruins and rotting corpses. News traveled slower than fire, but not slow enough. In River Run, Robb listened with clenched fists as a scout described the massacre, village by village. Dozens already gone, hundreds dead. The Lannisters were moving faster than any of their strategists thought possible. "Where are the Freys?" Robb demanded. "Where is Walder Frey's support?" Catelyn, pale and sleepless, answered without. Looking at him, he's stalling, waiting to see who bleeds first. Robb stood, shoving the war table so hard maps and stones scattered. "They're killing innocents," he growled. "Burning towns that swore no loyalty to me." "Jaime Lannister was a prisoner of war," Edmure said from across the hall, eyes hollow. "You executed him. Tywin doesn't care what the laws of war say anymore. He's not fighting to win. He's fighting to punish." Robb looked to his mother, the weight of every choice visible in his young eyes. "Did I do the right thing?" he asked quietly. "Tell me I did the right thing." Catelyn didn't answer, because deep down she wasn't sure anymore. In the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister became something else entirely. She stopped attending council meetings. She stopped eating with her children. She rarely even left her chambers. And when she did, she looked empty, as if something inside her had burned away completely the moment Jaime's head hit the mud. She no longer whispered about enemies. She screamed about them. "Send assassins to the twins," she ordered Grand Maester Pycelle. "Kill Walder Frey. If he hesitates again, I'll have his daughter's head in a box." "Your Grace," Pycelle trembled, his jowls quivering. "You have already dismissed the small council." "I am the council," she snapped. "I am the throne. And if my father dies in that field, if I lose another Lannister because of Stark treachery, then I'll see the whole North drowned in blood." Even Joffrey seemed disturbed. He clutched his sword at the council table and asked no foolish questions. "Not today." Meanwhile, Arya Stark wandered the woods alone. She didn't yet know Jaime Lannister was dead. She didn't know her father had escaped the capital, or that her brother had raised an army, or that the Riverlands were becoming a graveyard of innocence. She only knew the cold, and the hunger, and the hatred. Each night, she whispered the names Cersei, Joffrey, Ellen Payne, but she would soon add another Tywi. Netta for the Lannisters weren't just killing soldiers, they were killing everyone. And Arya would not forget. Back in the field, Robb gathered his war council again. They had to strike fast hard before Tywin could reach the heart of the North. But even as they planned, a raven arrived. Its message was sealed in crimson wax. Stark banners were burning near salt pans. The flames could be seen from the sea. Robb held the letter in shaking hands. "Thousands dead," he read aloud. "No resistance, no survivors. Women and children taken, some crucified." The silence in the tent was heavier than steel. Ned spoke at last, voice full of a quiet, bitter dread. "You lit the match, Robb," he said, "and now the world burns." Robb Stark stared at the map, but the lines and banners and pins meant nothing anymore. They were symbols of a war that had become something else. Not a struggle for thrones or territory, but a storm of vengeance now beyond control. Tywin Lannister was not fighting a war. He was waging an execution. "You want blood?" Robb said through clenched teeth. "Then we give it back." His voice shook as he spoke to the room full of battle-hardened men. The Greatjon, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, Sir Brynden Blackfish Butt. His eyes were steel. The boy was gone. Only the wolf remained. "We ride for Derry," he said. "We take the Riverlands back. For every farm Tywin burns, we salt one of his. For every life taken, we double the cost." Roose Bolton stepped forward, his pale eyes unreadable. "There will be no mercy?" Robb shook his head. "None." The room fell into grim silence. They all knew what that meant, even Ned, but this wasn't the same son he had left behind in Winterfell. This was a king learning that justice could not survive in the mouths of wolves. At Derry, the North descended like winter. They found Lannister forces entrenched in the keep, soldiers who had slaughtered every man, woman, and child in the village to make space for their camps. Smoke still rose from burned barns. Skulls lined the roads like trophies. Robb ordered no siege. They attacked before dawn. Archers rained fire from the woods. Gray wind tore through the eastern gate alongside the Greatjon's bannermen. Robb rode at the center, cloaked in wolf pelts, screaming his ancestors' names with every swing of his sword. The Lannister soldiers never had a chance. They tried to surrender. Robb refused. Every last man in red and gold was killed. Their heads were mounted on spikes by midday. "This," Robb said as they lit the keep blaze behind them, "is what war looks like now." But even in victory, the North began to rot. Men once proud of their honor now drank themselves numb each night. Some looted the towns they passed. Others took spoils darker than gold. And Roose Bolton, quiet, watchful, dangerous, was always at Robb's side, offering counsel that grew colder with each battle. "You must think like Tywin," Roose said one night in a ruined tavern. "To kill a lion, you don't fight him. You bleed him slowly." Robb, staring into his cup, barely nodded. He didn't recognize his own reflection anymore. At River Run, Catelyn watched her son become something harder, something sharper. He barely visited the halls anymore. He didn't ask for her advice. When he returned from battle, his eyes were full of ghosts. She wanted to speak of peace, of treaties, of rescuing her daughters, but every time she opened her mouth, he was already gone again. Ned, too, saw the change. One night, father and son stood in the godswood, beneath a full moon. "You're becoming what I tried to protect you from," Ned said softly. Robb looked down at the blood on his hands. "What choice did you leave me, father?" "You told me to be a wolf." Ned closed his eyes. "I told you to be a Stark, but even that name felt broken now." Meanwhile, in Casterly Rock, Tywin received word of Derry. 300 men dead, heads on spikes, his soldiers butchered like dogs. He didn't flinch. He didn't curse. He simply dipped his quill and began writing another letter. To Walder Frey. To Roose Bolton. To men who understood betrayal as a weapon. "You want to fight wolves." Tywin whispered to no one. "You give them one of their own." But far to the east, across the narrow sea, a girl with silver hair and 3 growing dragons heard whispers from sailors and spies. The north was rising, the south was bleeding, the lions were roaring, and the realm was cracking open, ripe for fire and blood. The North was winning on paper, but crumbling in truth. Victory had turned into a curse. Every town retaken brought more blood. Every Lannister defeat brought harsher retaliation. And every night Robb Stark laid down to rest, he dreamed of Jaime's severed head, his mocking smile haunting even in death. And far from his sight, his allies were beginning to whisper dot at the twins. Lord Walder Frey sat atop his crooked throne, surrounded by sullen sons and barely tolerated daughters. A raven had come 2 days earlier, bearing a letter from King Robb Stark, a request for more men, food, and safe passage for his wounded soldiers. Walder hadn't answered dot. Now, another letter came, this time sealed in gold. Tywin's words were precise, ruthless, promising lands, titles, power, revenge, and one line struck deeper than the rest. The boy broke his oath to you. Make him bleed for it. I will handle the rest, Walder grunted. Oaths mean nothing to boys who think with their swords. One of his sons spoke nervously. But if we betray the Starks, what of the North? They'll never trust us again. Walder scoffed. I'd rather be feared than trusted. The Starks don't know what fear is, but they will. At Dreadfort, Roose Bolton read the same letter by candlelight. He didn't blink, didn't frown. He simply folded it and placed it beside his wine. Then he called for his bastard Ramsay Snow, a creature of knives and smiles. Ramsay slithered into the chamber barefoot, his hands bloodied from his playthings. Father, he said with mock sweetness, you summoned your loyal son? Roose spoke with his usual chill. There may come a time when the North must be corrected. You will be the correction, Ramsay grinned. May I flay someone? Roose handed him the letter. Eventually, at River Run, the cracks spread like rot beneath the banners of the dire wolf. Catelyn could feel it, in the way the soldiers stopped saluting her, in the way they looked at Robb, now not with admiration, but fear. He had won battles, but lost something deeper and worse. She knew something was missing. Sansa, Arya, still in the Lannisters' clutches or worse. Has there been no word? She asked Maester Veman. He only shook his head. King's Landing is sealed tight. No ravens in, none out. She felt like screaming. Her daughters were pawns in a game being played by men who spoke of honor while drowning in blood. And her son? He was becoming one of them. Robb himself no longer believed in the war's purpose. He only believed in momentum. They had struck the Lannisters in 4 more towns: Barrowhall, Maidenpool, Hallow's Hollow, and Crackhall's outer farms. Bodies piled high, but victories felt hollow. One night, he stood with gray wind on a ridge, staring at a burning village far below. The flames lit his armor orange. His wolf paced beside him, growling low, restless. I thought this would end with justice, Robb whispered. Gray wind snarled at the sky. And now I don't even know if there's a point. Behind him, a figure stepped from the shadows. Roose Bolton. My king, he said smoothly. Perhaps it's time we consider ending this more efficiently. Robb turned. What are you suggesting? Roose's eyes were unreadable. Peace. My lord, the kind written in blood, not ink. He said nothing else, but the message lingered in the air like poison. In King's Landing, Cersei was preparing something monstrous. She had stopped waiting for her father. She wanted the North broken before Tywin even reached it. Varys had warned the small council. She's having meetings with alchemists, talking about wildfire again. This could end as it did for the Mad King. But no one could stop her, not even Joffrey, and not even Tyrion, who by now suspected his sister would burn the city herself if it meant hurting the Starks. "She's losing control," he told Bronn one night, "and when Cersei loses control, people die." Back in the field, Robb received a raven from the twins. "Walder Frey was ready to host a banquet, to renew our alliance," the letter said, "with bread and salt and music to wash away the blood." Robb read it thrice. Catelyn begged him to refuse, but Robb was tired. So very tired. "If we don't mend this," he told her, "we lose the Riverlands, we lose the North, maybe even ourselves." And so, against the warning in her eyes, he accepted. The drums of war fell silent at the twins' dot. It was an eerie stillness, the kind that blankets a battlefield moments before the slaughter. Yet here there were no battle horns, no swords drawn. Only laughter, music, and the uneasy clinking of goblets over cold wine. Robb Stark had arrived. He rode in with a trimmed host, no more than 100 men. The rest, as was custom, remained camped outside the gates. His banner flew beside House Frey's, a direwolf beside twin towers. Peace, it seemed, had been brokered, or so the message claimed. Walder Frey greeted Robb with a grin too wide and eyes too dull to mean it. "King Robb," he rasped, his voice like rotted parchment, "you finally remembered your manners. Shame it took you so long and a bit of blood." Robb bowed stiffly. "I've come to make things right." The old man chuckled. "Oh, don't worry, boy. You will." Inside the great hall, bread was broken. Salt passed. Music played. Walder's daughters lined the walls like forgotten dolls dressed in cheap silks, wearing faces of forced smiles. Robb offered polite nods, his mind distant. His mother sat beside him, eyes sharp, scanning every shadow. Something felt wrong, off. Too still, too clean. Robb sipped the wine, but it tasted like ash. Catelyn leaned in. "We leave after the toast," she whispered. "Something's not right." He nodded, but it was already too late. Across the room, Roose. Bolton sat with Ramsay, quiet and still, barely touching his food. Ramsay grinned at every joke, but Roose didn't laugh once. He only watched the young king with those pale, glassy eyes waiting. The musician struck up a strange tune. Catelyn's breath caught. It wasn't the wedding march. It was the Rains of Castamere. She turned to Walder Frey, who had vanished from the high table. Then she saw it. Beneath Roose's sleeve. CHAINMAIL. Her scream rose like a banshee's cry. "Robb, get down." But the doors slammed shut. Crossbows appeared in the balconies, and chaos erupted. Bolts flew into the crowd, striking. Northern lords mid-laugh. The Grachan's throat split open before he stood. Soldiers in Frey colors turned on their guests, hacking through them like wheat. Catelyn dove toward Robb, but Roose was faster. He plunged a dagger into Robb's side. The young king gasped, blood spilling over his tunic. Gray wind howled outside. The gates then fell silent with a shriek that echoed through stone. Catelyn screamed, lunging at Walder's last remaining wife with a blade to her throat. "Let him go," she shouted. "Let him." But Walder only sneered. "The Lannisters send their regards." And Roose plunged a dagger, again, this time straight through Robb's heart. The young wolf twitched once, then crumpled Dot outside. The Stark camp was already burning. Frey soldiers, joined by Bolton men, had descended like butchers. Tents were ablaze. Horses screamed. Wounded men crawled for their swords, only to be cut down mid-reach. Grey Wind's head was mounted on a pike by dawn, and Robb's body, still wrapped in his bloodied furs, was paraded through the hall like a trophy. Catelyn Stark died last. Her cries filled the chamber as she tore her nails through her own cheeks, dragging blood down her face. She begged, bargained, cursed every man in that room. Dot, and when she finally fell to the floor, a Frey dagger in her throat, the last thing she saw was her son's body. Cold, still, gone. Far to the east. Arya Stark arrived just as the fires smoldered out. She had followed whispers and dreams. Her Volf blood told her Robb was near. She reached the gates, starving, cloaked in mud, when she saw his corpse being dragged away like meat. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She turned and disappeared. A girl with no face, but a name carved in fire. The North was no longer a kingdom. It was a graveyard. Word of the Red Wedding spread like a sickness cold and unstoppable. From White Harbor to Deepwood Mont, ravens carried messages not of peace, but of treachery. Robb Stark, the king in the North, had been butchered under guest right, with his mother, his men, and even his direwolf slain. There were no survivors. No vengeance. No justice. Only silence. And the slow, creeping death of hope. At Winterfell, snow had returned. Ashes still lined the cracks in the stones. The Greyjoys had abandoned the keep after burning it, but it remained hollow, just bones of something once proud. And now, new banners flapped above its towers. A flayed man on a pink field. House Bolton had taken the seat of House Stark. Roose Bolton, Warden of the North, proclaimed so by Tywin Lannister himself, and beside him, walking the halls like a shadow, was Ramsay Snow. Ramsay had made Winterfell his playground. He hunted women in the God's Wood, fed prisoners to his hounds, and every night his screams echoed across the ruins, not from pain, but from pleasure. A new North was being forged with knives and fire. Far away, at the wall, Jon Snow received the raven in the dead of night. Sam handed him the scroll, his face pale. Jon read it twice, then dropped it. Robb is dead, he whispered. Sam reached for his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Jon. But Jon pulled away. He stared into the cold darkness of the Night's Watch courtyard, where snow fell like ash. They killed him like a dog. My brother, my mother, all of them. He clenched his fists until blood dripped from his palms, and in that moment the Watch lost part of him forever. He still wore black, still followed vows, but in his heart Jon Snow began to hate the South, and one day that hate would rise with fire. In the Vale, Sansa Stark heard the truth from Petyr Baelish himself. They slaughtered your brother, he told her, sipping wine. And your mother too. The boy who was once a wolf now lies cold in Frey soil. Sansa froze. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't crack. She simply whispered, "They'll pay." Petyr leaned closer, eyes sharp. "They will, my lady, but not with swords." He took her hand gently. "They will fall with whispers, with marriage, with betrayal." Sansa looked at the fire, her heart a cold stone in her chest. So much death, so much stolen, so much to reclaim. And in the east, Arya Stark sailed alone. She had escaped the twins in the night, disguised as a boy, her face half burned by fury. She said no prayers. She didn't look back. Only one thought kept her afloat on. The storm-churned sea. Kill them all? She whispered the names like lullabies. Cersei, Walder Frey, Roose Bolton, the Mountain, Joffrey. Every name a heartbeat. Every night a dagger in her dreams. She had no home now, only death. And death was a faithful companion. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat at the head of the small council, calm as ever. "They are broken," he said. "The North has no king. The Riverlands are ashes. The wolves are dead." But Tyrion frowned. "Dead wolves still have teeth." Tywin smirked. "Then we'll pull them out, one by one." Outside, Cersei stood on a balcony, staring at a red sun sinking into the black water. She had won. Her children were safe. The Starks were no longer a threat, but in her heart there was no joy, only a strange silence, and a whisper in the wind that sounded like, "You will fall next." Snow fell gently over the ruined fields of the north, but beneath its quiet cover, something old was stirring, a vengeance that would not rest. House Stark was dead, they said. Its king butchered, its people broken. But dead things in Westeros didn't always stay buried. At Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton celebrated his new title with blood. He had flayed 6 men for stealing bread, hanged 3 women for refusing him, and in the courtyard he made a sport of hunting girls with crossbows, loosing bolts while they ran screaming through the snow. He laughed like a child with toys. He thought the North feared him now, but the North had never feared monsters. It endured them. And then it devoured them. In the shadows of the Dreadfort, old Bannerman whispered again. Waymon Manderley in White Harbor, Lady Mage Mormont on Bear Island, Galbart Glover, Umber. They had bent the knee to House Bolton, but now their knees ached. Their oaths tasted like ash. And they remembered the boy who had been their king, the one who fought, bled, and died, while still holding to honor. "We were wolves once," Waymon said quietly before a hidden gathering. "We can be again." Across the sea, Arya Stark trained in silence. She had reached Braavos, the house of black and white. They stripped her of her name, her clothes, her past, but she clung to one truth, hidden behind her blank mask. She was Arya of House Stark, and she was learning to kill without mercy. To wear faces like armor. To disappear into the world and strike where vengeance lived. One day, she whispered, she would return to Westeros, and death would follow her in silence. At the wall, Jon Snow stood alone, watching the northern winds howl across the frozen wasteland. Ghost whined beside him, pacing. Jon had buried the news of Robb deep within, but the pain never dulled. He trained harder, climbed higher. And in his dreams, he saw Winterfell burning. Sometimes he saw Robb walking through the snow, silent and blood-soaked. Other nights, he heard his father's voice. "Is coming." Those words meant something else now. Not just weather, not just war, but reckoning. In King's Landing, Cersei's victory unraveled by inches. Tyrion watched her unravel, mad with power, paranoid of shadows. She ordered spies killed, whispers silenced. Her grip on Tommen was tight, but her hold on the realm was slipping. "She won the war," Varys whispered, "but she cannot survive the peace." Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister plotted to marry Sansa to a Lannister cousin, to lock her away in a golden cage. But Sansa had changed. She had learned from wolves and liars alike, and she would not be caged again. One night, in a tavern on the Trident, an old soldier told a story. He said a man wearing a direwolf brooch had killed 2 Frey men in the night, cut their throats and left their heads in a stew pot. He claimed he saw a wolf banner nailed to a tree near Seaguard with a message written, "In blood, in blood." The North remembers. At first, they laughed, but when more Freys turned up dead, the laughter stopped. And when Lord Wyman Manderley served Frey pie at a feast, it turned to fear. The war was over, they said, but vengeance had only just begun. And across the snows, in dreams and nightmares, the voice of the wolf still whispered, "We are not dead. We are watching." And winter is far from done.